gentleman's time has expired.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Taylor, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Chairman Powell, I'm sure you're familiar with Milton Friedman's treatise, Free to Choose.
Yes.
And this is an important, college textbook, I would think, on economics. And I would commend Chapter 9 to you, The Cure for Inflation. It is, I think it is, Mr. Friedman lays out some important premises of what creates inflation. And I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that the M2 money supply has gone up very dramatically. You're familiar with the Federal Reserve holdings and trillions of dollars of debt, the very dramatic increase on your balance sheet. I know you're aware of this because you were there. And the money in circulation. And this comports with, again, going back to Chapter 9 of Milton Friedman's book, and he goes in and talks about the inflation that took place in the 1970s, and he has a series of charts showing the supply of money. So here's the United States, and he goes on and shows the supply of money in Germany and Japan and the increase in prices, and then also the United Kingdom and Brazil. And so all of this is going to a very central point that when you increase money, and actually let me quote Mr. Friedman here for a second. When the quantity of money increases more rapidly than the quantity of goods and services available for purchase, we have inflation. You have printed too much money, sir, and that money has created inflation. To stop the inflation, I would recommend to you to stop printing the money. You indicated yesterday that you're going to start to slow down the printing of money. I think you should stop it, and stop it right now. Inflation is on the minds of Americans. Poll after poll for the last many months, 70, 80% of Americans, it's a top issue for them. They're concerned about inflation. Inflation is eating away their purchasing power. It is actually robbing them of the increases in wages that we've seen because their purchasing power is down because of the inflation that is created by the money that is being printed. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure. So price stability is one of our two goals, the other being maximum employment. We have to balance those two goals when they're in tension, as they are right now. But I assure you, we will use our tools to make sure that this high inflation we're experiencing does not become entrenched. If I may also add, though, the connection between monetary aggregates and either growth or inflation was very strong for a long, long time, which ended about 40 years ago. So the so-called velocity of money became quite variable. And so now we think more of just the imbalances between supply and demand in the real economy rather than monetary aggregates, which isn't to say that that was wrong when written. I think it was probably correct when it was written, but it's been a different economy and a different financial system for some time. Nonetheless, your point on inflation, well taken.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I just, Secretary Yellen, don't you think that the deficit spending that this administration, on an unparalleled level, right? I mean, the $2 trillion in deficit spending in February, dumping money into the economy, has created the inflation that we see today?
Well, the Build Back Better plan that's under consideration now is paid for.
Okay, but the $2 trillion in February, was that paid for?
The rescue plan was not paid for.
Okay, so that's $2 trillion in deficit spending.
There was a very good reason to pass that. We faced a major risk in terms of seeing our workforce, particularly the most vulnerable members of the American society, scarred permanently, losing homes, being unable to put food on their tables, take care of their children, and being permanently financially harmed, as well as there was a shortage of demand in the economy that could have resulted in long-lasting joblessness and high unemployment. And the plan that was enacted into law was focused on dealing with that, and it's been successful.
Did it create inflation? Did $2 trillion of deficit spending create inflation?
It did boost demand, and that is one of several factors that are involved in inflation. But we, absent the pandemic and the supply chain problems we've had and the negative impact the pandemic has had on the supply of labor.
What's interesting, Secretary Yellen, if I just to finish here, what's interesting is that Milton Friedman wrote in 1979, no government is willing to accept responsibility for producing inflation. And you, ma'am, have just embodied that denial because your spending, your deficit spending is creating the inflation that the Americans need relief from now. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired.